This video is now in session, and what I'm going to explain will sound a lot like a conspiracy theory, but hear me out. Ron DeSantis will be the next Ronald Reagan. At least maybe, probably. And the reason why I say this is because if you look at the news recently, the stock market has gone into a tumble. If you look at the Dow Jones, it has pretty much gone down by 3% today. This is Monday, June 13th, 2022. And if you look at the trends, what you're seeing is that the stock market is gradually going down. So, it's questionable as to whether you can say gradually, because it's down by like 22% over over 6 months, but it is down, and a lot of that is because of fears behind the Fed. A lot of people are thinking that the Fed is going to be very drastic when it comes to rate hikes. And the reason why is because if we look at inflation rates for the past several quarters, they have been on a record high. Just a few days ago, the Bureau of Economic Analysis, I believe, released a report that inflation, or that the the consumer price index was up by 8.2% in the third quarter, or no, in the second quarter of 2022. And because of that, or is it second quarter? Anyway, it rose by 8.2% within the last month. And because of that, a lot of people think the Fed is going to increase interest rates even more drastically than it already has, in order to curb inflation. It's because what's causing inflation at this current moment is there's both not enough supply and too much demand. The Fed has put a strangle on some of that demand, but there's so much of a shortage of supply to the point where the Fed has to rapidly decrease demand so that they can stabilize the price. And because of that, they are thinking of doing a 3/4 rate hike, in order to drastically reduce demand. And by doing that, what you're doing is that you're making borrowing harder, so now people want to save more instead of spending. And that's why a lot of Wall Street stock market individuals are incredibly scared, and that's why the stocks are going down and people's savings are going down. Their money is becoming less in value, and a lot of people are describing this as stagflation, when you have both inflation and a recession at the same time, where you have both not enough demand, not enough supply. Where you have both not enough supply, basically not enough supply, and because of that, if we look to the past, the last time stagflation happened was in 1976, or in that time period during Jimmy Carter's era, when I believe it was the Iran blockade of oil and the Arab Gulf War that caused oil to become a shortage, to become a commodity, a very highly sought after commodity in the United States, which raised oil prices because there was not enough supply. And when you don't have enough supply, that's called stagflation, where you have both inflation and you really can't do anything on the monetary level to actually fix that. So because of that, the Fed, I mean, they're still trying to do as much as they can to curb inflation, but we're expecting some really bad stuff for the economy in the future. If you look at Bitcoin has already gone down at like 50% or so since its peak in November. And a lot of people are not approving of Biden. Biden's approval numbers have actually dipped below 40% the first time this week since the start of his presidency. And, I get it. There's not really a ton the president or the Democratic Party can do when it comes to carbon inflation, especially when there is a Republican blockade in the Senate that's rejecting certain measures like price gouging and oil consumption. But at the same time, voters feel as if the Democratic Party was the one who started this in the first place. When the Democrats were ushered into office, the economy grew, but a lot of people blame inflation on overspending by the government. And it makes sense because the American Rescue Plan that the Democrats passed pretty early into Biden's presidency, that was a $1.9 trillion bill, and part of that came in the form of a deficit. And what that did was that it injected a ton of money into the economy, and people started overspending. So now there's not enough supply to meet that demand. And because of that, producers have to raise the price of their goods, and now we're all suffering. And it's something that we're most likely going to see in the long run, because stagflation, if we look at the last time it happened in 1976, it took a while for stagflation to go away, and that's because it takes a while for the supply to go back to regular levels. So there's a very, very large chance that Biden won't be able to win re-election in 2024. And it follows the history timeline. If we look back to the 1960s, we saw Jimmy Carter usher in a new era of a younger breed of politicians. And here in 2008, we saw Barack Obama usher in a new era for Black American representation, for minority representation, and and gave a lot of social advancements, just like how Kennedy did in the 1960s. But then there was some tumultuous stuff happening with Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon is known for a ton of scandals, and you could essentially say the same thing for Donald Trump. Donald Trump is known for a ton of scandals. So then what happens after Nixon? Well, Nixon gets replaced by his vice president, Gerald Ford. And in this version's history, that's kind of irrelevant. But let's go to 1976. The economy is starting, or not the economy, but rather people started to feel anxious about the government. They want someone who feels like is trustworthy. So because of that, they elect Jimmy Carter from Georgia. In 2020, many people felt dissatisfied with Donald Trump and wanted someone who could speak the truth to them, someone who could understand their issues. And that's why they elected Biden. So if we follow this historical timeline, and between Jimmy Carter's presidency, you have stagflation. In Biden's presidency, you're most likely going to see stagflation. Because of that, what happens afterwards? Well, if we look at history, in the 1980s, many people are over with Carter, and they replace him with Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan brings new supply side economics. He greatly increases the federal deficit, but eventually he gets the economy to calm down and to go back into regular levels. And then Clinton completes that transition by reducing the federal deficit and by having the economy thrive. So if we follow this timeline, and basically this timeline has been correct from 1960 to 1978. These 2 decades worth of history, almost 2 decades worth of history. If we follow that from 2008 to 2022, then what we see is that in 2024, Biden will be replaced by a Republican. Now, this is a more opinionated part, which is that honestly, I don't think that Biden is really I mean, as much as I think that the Democrats aren't the only ones to blame, Biden has to realize that the average American public likes to keep stuff simple, and because of that, many Americans blame this issue solely on the Democratic Party. So, that's something that Biden doesn't understand, and it's not something that he feels like it's not something that he's doing well on messaging, because he's essentially saying the American public, or at least for a couple of months now, he has been saying that the American public is wrong and that the economy has actually done very well during his time. And true, there are some statistics that say so, including job employment, but when you look at inflation, the other side of the economy, that's not going well. So The fact that Biden until now has not been able to recognize that is not going over well with the American public, which is why his approval rating is only at a 40%. So because of that, 2024, it seems likely that someone's going to replace him. Now, it's most likely not a Democrat because no Democrats have actually seriously tried to replace Biden in the 2024 Democratic primary. But at the same time, is it really going to be Donald Trump? Donald Trump is very controversial, and at this point, it seems like a lot of Republicans don't want him to be the 2024 nominee, or more specifically, Republican strategists. So who's the alternative? Ron DeSantis. And it makes sense because Ron DeSantis is heavily revered by the state of Florida, and he's heavily loved by the Republican Party nationally. And at the same time, he is similar to Reagan in that his social policies are actually very brash, just like Reagan's, and completely contrary to JFK in the 1960s and Barack Obama in 2008. So that presents a parallel opportunity. And furthermore, when it comes to the economy is one part where Ron DeSantis is actually doing not so bad in. If we look at the state of Florida, Florida has grown economically a ton because of the pandemic, and now you have rising housing prices. You have a ton of business here, especially during the spring and winter months, as the state has grown in its tourism, just like how California economically grew during Reagan's time as governor. So, as Bill Clinton says, it's the economy, stupid. And that's what's most likely going to be the biggest issue in 2024. That's something that Ron DeSantis can prove, and it's likely that he will be able to win the presidency if he can bring that message in contrast to Biden's current economy. So with that, that's how I believe that Ron DeSantis will be the next Ronald Reagan. Now, this is barring any attempt by the Democratic Party to replace Biden in the 2024 Democratic primary or any Republican challenger to Ron DeSantis. It also doesn't account for the fact that Trump could beat Ron DeSantis if both of them went head-to-head in the Republican primary. But if Ron DeSantis does go ahead with the 2024 run, he has a very high chance of winning that primary, and then he would have a very high chance of winning the presidency. And why do I think this? It all fits into this 80-year cycle. So this is called the Strauss-Howe generational theory, and it's basically it's kind of a conspiracy theory, but it's based on historical evidence. But the thesis is that the United States can be divided to 80-year cycles. So each cycle has 4 different phases in it. The first phase is a high phase. Everyone's doing well and everyone's having a good time. The second phase is when there is some social turmoil that's happening that kind of disrupts that we're all in this together spirit. And then the third phase is when things start to decline. And then the fourth phase is just absolute madness. So if we look at that in the context of history, the fourth cycle where everything's going into havoc, that was World War II. The third phase, that was the third phase is before World War II. You could say World War One, and then the second phase is before that, and then the first phase is right after the Civil War with the Gilded Age. I think that's 80 years, but basically it's those 4 cycles, and then now you have those 4 cycles repeating again in 20-year increments. So the first 20 years since World War II, that was the golden period, so 1945 to 1965. Then you have the social uprising during JFK's tenure, and then you have the unraveling, and then you have the absolute madness, which is happening right now from 2008 to most likely 2028. But yeah, this period, we're in a really bad period. But the good news is that this period hopefully should come to an end by 2028. If it doesn't, then this theory is absolutely wrong. But but it is based on historical evidence, and so far it's been right. So if this continues to be right, then Ron DeSantis will essentially be the next Ronald Reagan, as stated, as evidenced by historical findings, and we'll eventually get to a point where we can have a golden period where we no longer have to deal with school shootings all the time, or a bad economy that's just incredibly volatile. But for now, we have to deal with this pain because all of us are saying that the economy is bad. So now the economy is doing bad because of what we're saying. And there's not going to be an easy way out of this because the supply chain is a very tough issue. Getting supply to go up is a very tough job. That's incredibly hard to execute, or near impossible for the Fed to fix, and incredibly hard for Congress to fix. So yeah, that's the conspiracy theory that also happens to be backed by evidence. I hope you enjoyed this video. This video is now adjourned, and I'll see you in the next one.